Under the burning Afghan sun, the forward operating base was restless. Dust swirled across the gravel yard as Navy SEALs returned from patrol, rifles slung, boots dragging, sweat dripping from their brows. Captain Donovan, their commander, walked, among them with his usual sharp gaze, taking stock of the weary men and the defenses that kept them alive. He had led countless missions, earned scars and medals, and trusted only a few to stand watch when danger came. That was when he saw her. She was seated at a rough wooden table under a canvas awning, a massive Barrett .50 caliber rifle laid out before her. With calm, deliberate movements, she checked the chamber, inspected the scope, and ran her hands over the heavy barrel. She moved with precision, not hesitation. Donovan stopped mid-stride. She looked young, too young for the weapon, in her hands. Too small, too slight. Support staff, maybe intel or logistics, but not a combat operator. He approached, his shadow falling across the table. "Who told you to handle that rifle?" he asked, his tone cutting. The woman looked up at him, her brown eyes steady, unshaken by his authority. "No one told me," she replied. "I've been handling this rifle longer than you think, sir." There was no arrogance in her voice, no smugness. Just certainty. Donovan studied her face, his instinct telling him she wasn't bluffing. Still, part of him dismissed her. He had seen rookies try to impress before, and most of them cracked when it counted. Later, word spread quickly through the camp. The newcomer's call sign was Valkyrie. No one knew her real name. When asked, she only said, "Names don't matter, results do." At first, the men laughed, treating her as a curiosity. One of them challenged her to a field test, strip and reassemble the Barrett under pressure. She didn't hesitate. Her hands worked like clockwork, smooth and controlled. In under a minute, the weapon was back together and ready to fire, faster than anyone in the tent had ever done. The laughter died in stunned silence. Donovan wasn't convinced yet. Skill on a bench was one thing, composure under fire was another. But curiosity tugged at him. That night, in his command tent, he pulled up her file. The words on the screen made him sit back in disbelief. Confirmed sniper kill at 3,247 meters, the longest recorded shot in Allied history. Longer than Chris. Kyle longer than Craig Harrison. Donovan read it twice, 3 times, thinking it must be a clerical error. But the details were clear. Signed off by NATO command. The next day, when the others had gone about their duties, Donovan confronted her privately. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. She shrugged, wiping down her rifle. "Because it doesn't matter. People see what they want to see, Commander. They see a girl with a rifle, not someone who's done the work." Her words unsettled him. He had spent a lifetime telling his men to trust skill over assumption, yet he had fallen into the very trap he warned them against. 2 days later, the trap was sprung in a different way. Scouts reported enemy fighters gathering in the hills. Mortars were spotted being set up. The SEALs knew what that meant. A full assault was coming. The base buzzed with urgent activity, men stacking sandbags, mounting heavy weapons, checking comms. But the radio was already jammed. They wouldn't be able to call for air support in time. Donovan gathered his men in the command post. "They'll be on us by nightfall," he said. "We need an Overwatch sniper to cut their coordination." The team's designated marksman was down with an injury. The gap in their defense was obvious. His eyes shifted to Valkyrie. "You think you can cover us?" he asked. Her answer was quiet, but absolute. "I don't think." "I know." Some of the men muttered. One said, "This isn't a training range, sir. This is the real thing." Donovan silenced them with a hand. "She's earned her chance. And if she's what her record says, she may be the only one who can keep us alive." Night fell, and the desert erupted. Mortars thumped in the distance, shells landing in showers of dirt and fire. The SEALs rushed to positions, rifles blazing, voices crackling over comms. On the far ridge, Valkyrie crawled into position. She set the Barrett on its bipod, adjusted her scope, and checked her readings. Wind speed, distance, humidity. Her mind processed them like second nature. The massive rifle rested against her shoulder, not a burden but an extension of herself. 3 spotters marking targets. Donovan's voice came through. Can you hit them? She was already aiming. They're gone, she whispered. The Barrett roared, echoing across the valley. 1 shot, 1 down. Before the echo faded, she chambered another round. A second shot rang out, another body fell. The third tried to sprint, but at nearly 3,000 meters, she struck him down before he reached cover. The SEALs cheered over comms. Without spotters, the enemy's barrage faltered, their mortars scattering wildly. But the fight wasn't finished. Waves of fighters pushed forward, their gunfire rattling against the base. Donovan's men returned fire, but they were outnumbered. It was Valkyrie who shifted the tide. From her ridge, she picked off machine gunners, RPG operators, and squad leaders, one after another. Every time the enemy tried to rally, her rifle cracked and their momentum shattered. Hours dragged by in a blur of smoke, dust, and thunder. Ammunition dwindled. The men were exhausted, but they fought on. Then Donovan saw the real danger. A flanking squad was moving wide, slipping through a canyon that would put them behind the base. If they broke through, the defense would collapse. Extraction. Route won't hold, he muttered over comms. We need a miracle. Valkyrie's voice cut in. I see them. If I don't stop them now, they'll take you from behind. The range was nearly impossible. 3,200 meters. Wind was shifting. Terrain unstable. No one sane would attempt it. But Valkyrie slowed her breathing, narrowed her focus, and let the world fall away until there was nothing but the crosshairs and her target. She squeezed the trigger. The Barrett thundered, and a second later, the lead insurgent crumpled. Panic rippled through the squad. They scattered, running for cover, their assault broken before it began. The flank collapsed. Donovan exhaled slowly, realizing what he had just witnessed. She had done it again. Another impossible shot, another impossible save. When dawn broke, the desert was silent. The enemy had withdrawn, leaving behind bodies, broken weapons, and the echo of their failed assault. The SEAL base was battered, but it stood. The men sat in the dust, catching their breath, bandaging wounds, drinking what water they had left. Valkyrie walked back into camp. The Barrett slung casually over her shoulder. Her face was streaked with dust and exhaustion, but her eyes remained calm. One by one, the SEALs rose to their feet. At first it was instinct, then respect, then something deeper, recognition. Captain Donovan stepped forward. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he raised his hand in a crisp salute. The rest of the team followed, snapping to attention, saluting the woman they had doubted, mocked, and dismissed. In silence, they honored her. For the first time, Valkyrie allowed herself a faint smile. Not because she craved their recognition, but because the silence of doubt had finally been broken. She was no longer just a girl with a rifle. She was a warrior, forged in fire, standing among equals, a forgotten operator no longer. Under the pale morning sky, the NATO training grounds in Eastern Europe buzzed with activity. Soldiers from multiple nations were running drills, their voices blending in a dozen accents. Rows of armored vehicles lined the field, while tents flapped lightly in the breeze. Among the crowd, the U.S. Navy SEALs carried themselves with their usual hard confidence. At the center of it all, Commander Hayes watched over his men, arms folded, eyes sharp. That was when he noticed her, a young woman, lean and composed, crouched at the edge of the range, carefully assembling a Barrett M82A1. The massive rifle seemed almost comically oversized in her hands, yet she moved with unshakable certainty. Bolt, scope, bipod, each piece clicked into place with the rhythm of long practice. Hayes frowned. Women often worked in logistics or intelligence support during these joint exercises, but rarely did he see one handling a weapon like that. "Hey!" he called. his tone more a challenge than a question. "Where'd you learn to handle that?" The woman looked up, her expression calm. "Training grounds, same as you," she said. Her voice carried no defiance, just truth. The SEALs nearby chuckled under their breath. One of them whispered, "Maybe she thinks she's part of Delta Force." The others grinned, assuming she was just showing off. But Hayes's instincts told him there was more. He stepped closer, watching as she slid the final pin into place. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't falter. That wasn't a novice's rhythm. That was muscle memory forged by long hours and real pressure. Later, over mess, Hayes overheard a British SAS officer muttering to another soldier. "That girl, I heard she once trained with Delta snipers. Some say she's better than any of us." Hayes pretended not to listen, but the words stuck with him. Legends floated around war zones like smoke, often baseless, but sometimes they had fire beneath them. That night, the soldiers were supposed to run a routine joint exercise simulating an enemy ambush. Hayes's team prepared for it, checking radios, plotting movements, rehearsing the assault plan. It was nothing unusual, but just before they deployed, reports came in. A real hostile group had moved into the training zone. Not part of the exercise. Real fighters, heavily armed, exploiting the chaos of NATO drills. Suddenly, the exercise turned into a crisis. Unit of Allied soldiers was pinned down near a ridge, unable to move. Hayes and his SEALs scrambled to mount a rescue, but the approach was suicide. Enemy fighters had dug in on the high ground, snipers and machine guns covering the field. Any advance would be shredded before they made 50 meters. Hayes studied the terrain, jaw clenched. Then he heard her voice behind him. "Give me a shot." He turned. It was the same young woman with the Barrett. She had the rifle slung across her shoulder, eyes fixed on the ridge. Hayes narrowed his eyes. "You think you can make that distance?" Her reply was calm, almost casual. "I've made longer." The SEALs muttered in disbelief. One of them shook his head. "Sir, this isn't a shooting range. We can't gamble on her." But Hayes couldn't ignore the confidence in her tone. Against his better judgment, he gave a short nod. "Fine. You've got one chance." She moved quickly, finding a firing position atop a rocky outcrop. The Barrett rested on its bipod, the massive weapon gleaming faintly in the fading light. She adjusted her scope, her breathing steady. Hayes crouched nearby, scanning the ridge through his binoculars. "Targets the machine gun nest," he said. "They're tearing our guys apart." "I see it," she replied. The Barrett thundered. The recoil shook the ground, echoing across the valley. A heartbeat later, Hayes watched the machine gunner slump over, his weapon silent. Before the enemy could react, she fired again. Another shot cracked through the night, and a sniper went down. Soldiers on the ridge scrambled, confusion spreading through their ranks. At nearly 3 kilometers, she fired with precision that didn't seem human. Each pull of the trigger was measured, deliberate. Every shot broke the enemy's cohesion, buying the pinned soldiers precious time. Hayes couldn't believe what he was seeing. The impossible range, the impossible accuracy. Yet she made it look effortless. For a moment, he thought of legends he'd heard back in training. Carlos Hathcock, the Vietnam-era Marine sniper. Chris Kyle, the SEAL known as the Legend. Craig Harrison, the British sharpshooter with one of the longest confirmed kills in history. And now, this unknown woman, carving her name into that. Same list with each thunderous shot. The pinned NATO soldiers began to retreat, stumbling toward safety. Hayes and his team moved to cover them, charging into the chaos with disciplined fire. The woman's Barrett sang from above, every shot protecting their advance. Still, the battle was far from won. The enemy regrouped, pouring fire down the slope. Hayes's men took cover behind boulders, returning fire, but their position was fragile. Then Hayes heard her over the comms. There's a leader rallying them on the far ridge. If I drop him, they'll break. Hayes raised his binoculars, spotting the figure. The range was absurd. Over 3,200 meters, winds shifting across the valley. No one could make that shot. No one sane would even try. But she adjusted her scope, calmed her breathing, and let the world narrow to a single point. Her finger tightened. The Barrett roared. Silence followed. Through his binoculars, Hayes saw the enemy leader collapse. Chaos rippled through the fighters. Some shouted, some fled, others simply froze. Their assault crumbled in an instant. The SEALs pressed the advantage, moving swiftly to secure the ground and guide the NATO soldiers back to safety. Within minutes, the battle was over. The enemy, shattered and leaderless, melted into the night. Exhausted but alive, the Allied soldiers gathered at the base of the ridge. They looked up at the lone figure descending with the Barrett slung across her back. Dust coated her face. Her hands were raw from the rifle's recoil, but her eyes remained calm. Hayes stepped forward, meeting her at the base. He studied her for a long moment, the disbelief still lingering in his mind. Finally, he spoke. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then answered quietly. "They call me Phantom 7. The men around them fell silent. Some had doubted her, some had mocked her, but now every one of them stood straight, respect written across their faces. Hayes gave a slow nod, then raised his hand in salute. One by one, the others followed. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She only nodded once, acknowledging their gesture. For her, it wasn't about recognition. It was about doing the work, protecting lives, and proving, without words, that skill. And courage knew no boundaries. In the days that followed, stories of the shot spread quietly through the ranks. Soldiers whispered about the woman who had dropped a commander at over 3 kilometers, saving an entire unit. Some called it luck, others called it impossible. But those who had been there knew the truth. She wasn't just a girl with a rifle. She was a ghost in the hills, a legend in the making. And though her name might never appear in official records, those who saw her fire that night would never forget Phantom 7. Under the scorching desert sun, a distant ridge shimmered in heat waves. The forward operating base in Iraq was small but strategic, a crucial outpost for coalition forces. Soldiers moved in disciplined chaos, checking weapons, organizing supplies, and monitoring communications. Among them, a rumor had begun to circulate. A mysterious female sniper had joined the Allied ranks, attached temporarily to a British SAS unit. Most dismissed it as a training myth, an exaggeration, but Commander Reynolds, a seasoned Navy SEAL with decades of frontline experience, had heard the whispers and decided to investigate. He found her in the weapons storage area, crouched over a Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle. The massive weapon looked almost comically large in her hands, but she handled it with absolute mastery. Every adjustment, every check of the bolt, every alignment of the scope was deliberate. She didn't rush, yet moved with efficiency that rivaled the most seasoned marksman he had ever seen. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "You know this rifle isn't exactly a beginner's toy, right?" She didn't flinch. "I know," she replied. Her voice was calm, almost casual, but there was an edge to it that made him pause. "I've trained with the best. I can handle it." The SAS soldiers nearby exchanged skeptical glances. Some snorted quietly, thinking she was overconfident. But Reynolds had learned over years in the field that instinct and skill often lived where appearances deceived. Later, as night fell, a warning crackled over the base communications. Enemy forces had moved close, using the cover of twilight to infiltrate nearby positions. The SAS and SEAL teams quickly mobilized. The perimeter was breached at several points, and the noise of gunfire and shouts filled the air. Reynolds moved to a vantage point atop a rocky outcrop to assess the situation. Enemy fighters were entrenched on a distant ridge, using machine guns and snipers to pin down the coalition forces. There was no clear path for a direct assault. From the chaos, he saw her again, silently moving into position with her Barrett. She had slung it over her shoulder, surveying the ridge with a focus that made the surrounding noise seem distant. He called out over comms, "You're in a dangerous spot. Do you know what you're doing?" She simply nodded. "I've made longer shots than this. You'll see." Reynolds watched in disbelief as she set up her rifle, adjusting the bipod, calibrating the scope, and estimating wind, distance, and terrain. Every measurement she took seemed instinctive, precise, and terrifying in its confidence. The first shot rang out, shattering the night's tension. One enemy sniper crumpled instantly. A second followed, then a third. From over 3,200 meters, her rounds were flawless, each one disrupting the enemy's coordination. Coalition soldiers began to move cautiously, taking advantage of the disruption to secure better positions. Hours passed, but the enemy did not relent. They attempted to flank the base, sending a squad along a narrow canyon that would place them behind the defensive line. Reynolds realized the threat immediately. If that squad reached the base, the coalition forces would be overwhelmed. Her voice came over comms, calm and measured. "I see them. I'll stop them before they reach you." Reynolds squinted through his binoculars. The range was nearly impossible. Few could even attempt such a shot. But she adjusted her scope, let her breathing slow, and narrowed her world to a single point of focus. The Barrett cracked. The enemy squad leader fell. Chaos erupted among the flanking soldiers, their advance halted as panic took over. The coalition soldiers pressed the advantage, moving forward while covering fire shattered the enemy's resolve. By dawn, the battlefield was quiet. The enemy had withdrawn, leaving behind only scattered equipment and the memory of a failed assault. Reynolds' men, exhausted and shaken, regrouped at the base. They saw her emerge from the ridge, dust coating her uniform, rifle in hand, expression calm, but eyes alert. Reynolds stepped forward, his gaze steady. "Who are you?" he asked. She lowered her rifle slightly and replied almost quietly, "Call me Silent Legend." The soldiers around them fell silent. Many had doubted her, some had mocked her, yet here she stood, the architect of their survival. They looked at her not as a newcomer or a curiosity, but as a protector and warrior. Reynolds raised his hand in a salute. Slowly, one by one, the others followed. There were no words, only acknowledgement of courage, skill, and precision that had saved lives. She didn't smile, didn't claim victory. She only nodded once, accepting their respect without pride. Her focus remained on the mission, on the work that had to be done. For her, recognition was irrelevant. She had done what was necessary. In the following days, the story of the sniper, who had held a ridge alone, spread quietly through the ranks. Some called her a ghost, others a legend. But those who witnessed her fire knew the truth. Phantom 7, Silent Legend, Valkyrie. Names were secondary to the fact that she had turned the tide of battle with courage and skill. Reynolds watched her training the next day. She moved with the same calm mastery, correcting younger soldiers, demonstrating techniques, adjusting to terrain, teaching without words. He realized something profound. Her presence didn't just save lives. It inspired those around her to believe in their own potential. The base settled into a new rhythm, stronger and more cohesive than before. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones about the sniper who had saved them, and while some were skeptical, those who had been there knew the truth. She wasn't simply a soldier. She was a force that combined patience, precision, and courage, shaping the battlefield silently, yet decisively. Reynolds reflected on the events, acknowledging that legends weren't always men in command or those celebrated in media. Sometimes legends were forged quietly in the desert, under scorching sun and deadly fire, by those who moved like shadows, acted with certainty, and protected life with unwavering skill. And in the heart of that desert, with dust settling on, empty ridges and the sun rising over the horizon, she walked past the tents, rifle in hand, unassuming yet unstoppable. She was the silent legend, a name that would live quietly in the memories of those who had seen her in action, never needing accolades, never seeking fame. She had proved that courage, precision, and resolve were not bound by gender, history, or rank. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and yet, in a single night, had carved her story into the very landscape, leaving an indelible mark on the people and the battlefield. By the time the base returned to routine operations, every soldier who had witnessed her had learned an unspoken truth. Skill and bravery often arrive in unexpected forms. And when those forms emerge, they reshape the world around them, leaving behind stories whispered for years to come. Even as the desert winds shifted and the day grew hot, she remained a figure of calm in the chaos, a reminder that legends were not always announced. They were recognized by their deeds. And the soldiers who had fought beside her would never forget the day the silent legend saved them all.